for example, in the UAE, they gave 2 shots of the Chinese vaccines, and still everybody was pretty much getting COVID, and they decided that, oh no, we need to stop giving these jabs, and then they switched to Pfizer and Moderna. So the third booster shot was there, and I think at least 10 countries they found fault with Chinese vaccines and suspended vaccination.
Hello and welcome to A Questioning Mind. I'm your host Thakkar, and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Chirayu Thakkar. Namaste and welcome, Chirayu.
Namaste.
Chirayu is a joint doctoral candidate, and he's pursuing his PhD in international relations from the National University of Singapore and King's College London. He's also previously worked at the Stimson Center for Policy Research based out of DC. And he is also an alum of South Asian Studies program from Oxford University. So it's a great pleasure to have you join us for this very short-ish conversation about Quad's vaccine diplomacy and strategic benevolence as a whole. So, Chirayu, today, you recently wrote an article in the Telegraph also, which I read with much interest, and you discussed the concept of strategic benevolence as well as how it bound the Quad together. So, in that sense, could you just give the audiences a brief idea of how, what you mean by this, and if it's achieved anything beyond the numbers that we see in terms of vaccine donations and sales?
Sarika, thank you for having me. And the piece that I wrote for the Telegraph, my sole objective there was to say that, look, you have been talking for vaccine diplomacy, and you have been talking of the force for the global good, so on and so forth. And these all things make great headlines. I mean, all 4 leaders, the Quad country leaders, they wrote a joint op-ed in Washington Post. And I mean, all this is good. But at that time, or until most recently, they were struggling to deliver the vaccines. In fact, so it happened that my piece came out on 20th of April, and 21st of April, the first consignment of vaccines under the Quad initiative was delivered to Cambodia. And I mean, earlier India is doing its own vaccine matching program. The United States decided that, oh, we don't need a lot of this reserve vaccine, so they also started putting out. Australia is doing its own initiative. Japan is putting money, and of course China is also doing its own way. But the point that I was trying to make is that the situation the world was going on in the aftermath of the World War II, and then the United States said that, look, we have fought with everyone, enough, but now we need to think in strategic terms, and we need to make sure that the world is rebuilding. Global markets are opening up. It also makes space for our own goods. So it is an international economic order building up is good for the United States as well. But moreover, we don't need to think in terms of war binary, that who are the allies and who are the Axis powers. We need to think about creating a new global order that encapsulates everyone. And one of the important elements of that was the Marshall Plan. So under the Marshall Plan, the whole thing was that let's rebuild the Europe that has been devastated by war. But the surprising element of it was that they were not only willing to tide up the chaos and the commotion that was created during the war and the infrastructural needs of the powers that fought along them, but the powers that either remained neutral or fought against them. To the extent that there was a time when proposals were made to Khrushchev as well, that we are willing to fund you. But Khrushchev, being the political mind he was, and he said that no, we are not willing to do it, and they came up with their own plan. So the whole point is that that was an act, what I called an act of strategic benevolence. There was a benevolence. You wanted to instill order as a global hegemon. There were strategic insights, but it was equally strategic in nature as well. So the strategy element was deeply baked into the act of benevolence that went in the Marshall Plan. Now, my argument is, and I think many people have made it in very different ways. I'm drawing an analogy here. Others have not drawn analogies. I'm not coming up something surprisingly new. But what I'm trying to say is that the world is going through a worst crisis since the Second World War. The
Mm.
economic devastation of 1.5 years. Thankfully, the economies all over the world are opening up, so on and so forth. Now, traveling has eased up. 60% people are being double jabbed now. So we are now in a much relatively better situation. But the fact of the matter is that 40% of the world still hasn't got vaccines, and because of it, a lot of markets are not opening up, or they are still remaining under the fear of next deadly variant to come and screw their population, and they might have to still go back into an economic inertia. They might have to go back in lockdown, see what is happening in Shanghai. So the current requirement of the international society is vaccines, and you can't keep talking about democracy and authoritarianism and say that look, we are the good guys. A critical element in the same story was there. What we are seeing is a deja vu. During the time in the aftermath of the Second World War, we were talking about democracy versus communism, and we are saying that look, this is a free world and a free society, and you should come and join our club. That was the messaging, but the messaging alone is not enough. So even today,
Nice.
if we say that we are not entering a new Cold War, and I mean that's a lazy phrase to use because we are in a relatively multipolar world, but even if we see an emerging bipolarity where China and some Russia and other powers are coming together, and perhaps the Quad and some others are coming together, if we want to use that emerging bipolarity as a convenient phrase, then just saying that we are democracies and coming together and we are force for good is not enough. You need public goods provision, and the current requirement in terms of public goods is vaccine. Others, as they have rightly identified, infrastructure to combat climate change, infrastructure to build other things. But again, I'm not going into the details. The pressing issue right now is vaccines.
Right. And we will also go into India's own initiatives in terms of vaccine maitri and see how that's worked out. But strategic benevolence with regards to the Quad has just started. As you said, Cambodian vaccines were delivered very recently, and we expect this to go on and for Quad to take, a much larger role in terms of participation in this act of benevolence, as strategic benevolence. I just want to clarify for the audience that what Chirayu was referring to with regards to the Marshall Plan and Khrushchev being suspicious of it. Was basically he suspected that the benevolence came with too many strings attached from which he could not probably part. So in that sense, Chirayu, would you like to distinguish for the audience between the debt diplomacy and the vaccine diplomacy with regards specifically to Quad, not the vaccine maitri program?
See, here, uh, let us distinguish between three different initiatives
Sure.
and their underlying philosophy. Now, one is India's own initiative, the Vaccine Maitri program.
Mm.
The second is the Quad initiative, and the
Mm.
third is Chinese initiative. Now, uh, uh, the good, better, and the best. I don't know in which sequence should I go, but let us talk about the Chinese first. Now, CSIS has put out a brilliant report on Chinese vaccine initiative. Now, initially, the world thought that, oh, China is doing this great good, and perhaps it is because the virus emerged in Wuhan, or at least that's the current understanding of the world, because still China is not allowing, or the World Health Organization is not up to its leadership, and it does not want to investigate. But because it had an element of guilt, that is the reason, and it also had the capacity to supply goods to the world globally. So, China is initially helping the world with PPE kits and other things. But what we are realizing from this CSIS report is that over 99% of the PPE kits and other such elements or other such medical consumables that were provided by China initially, over 99% of them were sold.
Mm.
So China was not doing any good to world. I mean, it was merely transactional relationship. And
Right.
worldwide, because initially the information was not available, so a lot of people were thinking that perhaps there's an element of guilt, that, oh, this happened and India wants, China wants to rebuild its image, so on and so forth. But that was not the case. It was purely transactional. I mean, in 0.5 or 0.7%, whatever they donated, I'm sure there would be strings attached to it as well. Now, in other cases where it provided vaccines or it sold vaccines, there were very severe strings attached. So, in the case of Hungary, now we know that Hungary actually blocked an EU resolution pro Hong Kong. Now, there's a lot of going on, but vaccine is considered as one of the key elements, and that's what the experts believe, those who watch and know this topic quite seriously. Uh, the second is the case of Paraguay, where they were asked to switch their recognition from Taiwan to China. A third
Mm-hmm.
case is that of the Philippines, that while the consignment of Chinese vaccines was on its way, along with that, the maritime militia was also trying to occupy the Whitsun Reef. And Duterte, who actually sounded very tough, couldn't do much about it because there were elections. He had to maintain his own legitimacy. And in so doing, he desperately needed Chinese vaccine because he could not afford the others. So if you can't take strategic real estate by this way, of creating that trade diplomacy, then you'll use this way by using the vaccine diplomacy. So one way or the other, they need the strategic piece of real estate. Now, all this sounds elements of coercive diplomacy.
Sure.
Now, what Quad stands for? It stands for relatively liberal world. There is a liberal international order. Of course, money from IMF also comes with conditionality. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it expects some geopolitical reorientation. So I won't say that there are saints on one side and scoundrels on the other side. I mean, it's never like that in geopolitics. But there is a limit to coercion. Also, you do not exploit people's circumstances and this kind of a pandemic. And especially, there should be some element of guilt and shame if a pandemic has emerged and you actually you could not control the pandemic in the week period, uh, because you were more concerned about your global image rather than containing the pandemic. So again, I mean, the jury is still out where it emerged and how did it happen. But for now, this is the second model that the Quad wants, and the Quad wants to remain the old liberal international order intact. Now, do countries play politics in it? Definitely, but there is a limit to coercion. It's not this naked. It's not this aggressive. Indian model is very different. In the Indian model, what we call the vaccine metric, the latest 18th April data shows that what we have here is 17.81 crore vaccines are either sold or donated. Now, in the case of China, according to the CSIS report, I think 96% of it is commercial, 4% of it is, how do I say, it's donated. And if you look at their aid data, the long term, so aid data is a project that tracks global Chinese foreign aid. And if you look, it has some correlation with that philosophy as well. So, China, in the case, I think 96% of it, Chinese aid comes in forms of loan, and 4% of it usually comes in grants. If you look at the Indian side, now I have my own data for India's foreign aid to Africa, and it will come out soon as a paper, and I'm going to release the data set as well. There, the number that I have come up with is like around 7%, and that is reflected in our vaccines as well. That our vaccines are around 7 to 8% are donations, and around 90 92% it is a commercial transaction. So we are more generous compared to China. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that whenever we have got an SOS call from anyone, now the great example being Dominican Republic. Now we don't have that sort of ties. We have very limited equities in the Pacific Islands, so on and so forth. But regardless, when we got an SOS call from, I think Roosevelt Scarrett was the prime minister there, and when the Dominican Republic's PM, he sent an SOS message to PM Modi. We immediately dispatched in a consignment of vaccines. And he has this famous tweet out that I believe in Bible, but I was never sure that our prayers would be heard so swiftly. So now, does it generate goodwill? Yes, it generates goodwill. Are there coercive strings attached? Perhaps not, because
Mm,
India believes in goodwill. India would take. I'm not saying that there are no strategic minds in the Indian establishment. Would they use this goodwill to its advantage? Perhaps they would. At some point, they would. But what I'm trying to say is there are no strings attached, and in some cases you can see it's merely an act of generosity. In the case of Nepal, then Prime Minister KP Oli, he was like so much grateful to India's initiative. But when it came to the point where he had to play politics, he played very aggressive politics against it. So
right.
we are not the type that who would make sure that vaccines are weaponized so that you can't play politics against us. I mean, the Nepal being the case in point is we were generous with vaccines, and and that particular dispensation played politics against India,
Mm, mm,
and it shows that we have that freedom given to them. And China instigated it. The envoy
sure.
met. There's a story behind it. But all I'm trying to say is when we say Maitri, there is a philosophical element of altruism to it.
Mm,
Uh, are we going to use it, this goodwill? Are we going to convert it into strong action? Maybe yes. And there I would like to raise a small point and complete this. So, if you read Ambassador Saeed Akbaruddin's book India versus the UK, and in that he says that when we came into the final round, uh, first group of countries that came in our support were the Pacific Islands,
mm,
the
mm,
7 or 8 countries, that the group of it. Now, why did they came? If you look at the UN, now he is not giving the explanation, but this is my understanding. Now, if you look at the UN South South Fund, India is a generous donor there, and we have actually installed the early warning coastal system for
mm,
all of these countries. I think it costs something around 2 million per unit or something like that. You can go and read the report. But when you deliver such kind of public goods, you can reap the benefits of that at a certain point. But it is not transactional in nature. It's not that on the one way, on one sea lane, your vaccine consignment is coming on the second sea lane, your maritime militia is coming. Or a letter comes along with the vaccine that says that, look, this is the recognition switch over. Before you can start putting the jabs, you have to change it. So
right.
these are some of the issues. These are the three different models, and I think India has really shown some generosity in this particular instance.
Right. I think that's very well addressed. I remember the tweet from the president of the Dominican Republic and sorry, the Prime Minister of the Dominican Republic, and the speech after that was quite moving. And even with regards to Nepal, I think out of 20,000 have 20,000 lakhs, so that would be 20 20,000 lakhs is the number I remember. So
Yeah.
that many vaccines have been sold to the state of Nepal, but more than half of that, so that's 11,000 in lakhs. I'll link the data below. So that many vaccines have also been donated. So in terms of being a good neighbor with somebody who's been acting pretty hostile and in in cahoots with China, so we've been quite generous in terms of our vaccine diplomacy. It's more diplomacy, and the word vaccine maitri actually makes sense for the kind of diplomacy India has carried out versus the kind of course of strategic benefits that China has drawn from the people from the countries that it has not only donated to, but actually sold their vaccines and PPE kits to. In fact, one should read. I'll link the numbers for the demands for the Paraguayan. Installments as well. It was quite interesting to see how coercive China could be, and it's also why do you think that it has so much leverage as compared to, say, why don't these countries come to India, even with regards to the efficiency of the vaccines, we've seen that Indian vaccines have done better than the Chinese vaccines, than Sinovacs. So why do you think that China still has so much leverage over these countries?
Uh, see, before I answer your question, I would like to make one more point regarding Nepal, and I think we are seeing a similar situation happening in Afghanistan as well. In India, we have this philosophy, or at least there is a governance philosophy baked in Indian mindset that uh, the population of a particular country is not the same as the
True,
dispensation in
true.
that country. So there can be a hostile dispensation, or at least an unfriendly one. If hostile is like too aggressive a word, then an unfriendly dispensation in Nepal, but the people of Nepal are different from that dispensation. The same goes for Afghanistan. The current rulers are the Taliban there. But despite that, we are the biggest donor of
Of
food
food.
aid. And Sagarika, you have to remember what kind of crisis uh, Afghanistan is going through. It would be the first country by the end of year if enough aid is not going its way to achieve universal poverty. Now,
Right.
there is this one survey which I have quoted in an upcoming book chapter where the people of the program they called up people with land phones. And of the land phone, people having land phones. So there's an element of luxury to it. And those people out of it, 98% said that we don't have enough nutrition. So I'm not even talking about the squatters and the people on the street side. People, those who are having proper homes and those who can, despite the civil war, those who can afford the land phones, those people are saying that we don't have adequate food. 98% of it. So in that situation, the biggest donor of food aid is India, despite some problems that we had with Pakistan. So now we have never been friendly with Taliban. The world knows it. We were never even willing to talk to them. But the Indian government knows that people of Afghanistan and the ruler of Afghanistan, there's a difference. People of Nepal and the ruler of Nepal, that's the difference. Now coming to your current question. Uh, see, there were various phases of it. First of all, China came in early on, and there was this global race that let us get our population vaccinated first.
Mm,
And not every country in the world has quite stringent regulatory mechanisms. So a lot of countries were willing to start the vaccine campaign with some leniency, and there was a convergence of interest. So China wanted to get its vaccine exported as much as it can, so to show the world that oh, it is the new leader in this situation. The West is still struggling to meet the needs of its own people. China has already started exporting it, and there were some countries or many countries in the Middle East, in Latin America, they were said, oh, even if your vaccines are 60% having 60% efficacy, no worries. Let's just give it, let us start rolling it out. So we can show to our population. Some had elections, and some didn't have election, but because they were monarchies or they were like presidential rules, they were one party systems, and they were like, we need to secure vaccines to maintain our legitimacy. So those things happen. Now, for example, in the UAE, they gave 2 shots of the Chinese vaccines, and still everybody was pretty much getting COVID. And they decided that, oh no, we need to stop giving this jabs, and then they switched to Pfizer and Moderna. So the third booster shot was there, and I think at least 10 countries they found fault with Chinese vaccines and suspended vaccination.
right.
Yeah. So the first phase was people were desperate. That's where China made inroad. Second phase, where, and your question why people did not reach out to India. Second phase, was a very unfortunate phase at home, where we had started this vaccine Maitri program, and we were delivering vaccines globally. But then a very vicious second wave hit India home, and at that time, uh, the domestic politics also came into being, and also the natural principle of attending to the needs of its own citizens also hit home. And therefore, there were severe disruptions for, I think, 6 to 8 months, where India was not willing to, export vaccines anywhere. So, and third, of course, China has already put in a lot of money. There are a lot of loans out there, which also it can use as a leverage and say that, look, we are going to restructure your debt, but you are going to use our vaccines. And when India uh, actually delivered its first vaccine consignment, it was Global Times who put out a piece and saying that, look, India is trying to compete with us. We are not in a competition. We are doing an act of generosity. I mean, I don't know what act of generosity says 99.5% PPE you sell and then say act of generosity. I mean, if commercial transaction is act of generosity, then all these billionaires are the most philanthropist people in the world. So I think China operates under a different dictionary. But anyways, it's Global Times. They can write what they want to write. So this shows the thinking within the Chinese establishment, that they were very clearly thinking this as competition. So it was not only their goal to ensure that their vaccines make inroads, but it is also another thing that they prevent Indian goodwill penetrating into newer territories. So there was a dual track happening. But you know what played, what element played in India's favor? It was India's capacity. Currently, India, and I mean, there is for, it is not for no reason that India is called the pharmacy of the world. I mean, you take the biggest brand, the Johnsons and Johnsons, the Mercks, the Sanofis, the GlaxoSmithKline, and you put all of them together, they are not producing what Serum Institute of India is producing alone.
Right.
So, sometimes you can have good intentions, but you might not have capabilities. So there should be a convergence of conviction and competence both. And in this case, in the case of vaccine, there is a clear convergence of both these things. So
Right.
we believe in this idea of donating and altruism and reaching out to people's need. And I'm not saying again that we are the saints here. We might use this goodwill to some point at our advantage. It's basically geopolitics. But right now, along with vaccine, you don't send an invoice that switch your recognition. That's not what India does.
Right. That's very well put. I think the convergence of competence and capability and
Conviction.
goodwill.
Yeah.
Conviction, sorry,
Yeah.
conviction and capability. That's a very good point, because in this case, I think our convergence was very beneficial for a lot of nations, not just ourselves, because we were able to help all of these nations. And I think I will again link below the data so one can go through the national data about vaccine donations as well as transactions. And you can see that we've done a lot of donations across the world, whether it's Mauritius, where 1/4 of the vaccines are donated, as opposed to 3/4 which are transactionally purchased. Seychelles, we've donated, we haven't even sold to them. Bahrain, same thing. So we've India has done essentially a lot of good work, and hopefully it does work to generate that goodwill. And maybe in the coming years we will see some results from that. Although we've been less coercive and less thoughtful about the strategy, perhaps in some cases we've had to be, but in most cases we have considered the strategy aspect a little after we've considered the benevolence aspect of it.
I think less coercive would not be the right word, because we haven't
We
shown
haven't
any
been coercive.
yeah,
Yeah.
we haven't shown any
We
signs of
haven't.
coercion. I mean,
Right.
we can be pragmatic,
Sure.
but I mean, coercive. Of course, there is an element of strategy. We have served our neighborhood first, where we are most worried, because that can have a spillover effect into our own
Absolutely.
territory as well. So, is there an element of pragmatism? Yes, there is. But coercion, I think we have not yet reached there, and I hope, for the sake of heavens, that we don't acquire that trait of being coercive when the world is reeling under such kind of pandemic.
Sure. For example, even in Guyana, where China was coercive and they did request, they did ask Guyana to transfer their allegiances, India has donated vaccines and not sold them anything. I think we knew the kind of pressure they were under anyway. And even though it may have been a bulwark against further Chinese coercion, it definitely was an act of altruism as well. So I did ask about debt diplomacy as well. Can you alternate, the kind of diplomacy, say the Quad has attempted here versus debt diplomacy? Since you mentioned Marshall Plan and strategic benevolence, how would you compare these two? Do we expect more strings attached, even though it's a liberal world order? Should the world be suspicious?
Well, Sagarika, that is also an important point. I mean, today we are talking about this vaccine diplomacy, but at some point you should invite some experts, and perhaps I can join as well, and we can talk about debt trap diplomacy and how
Sure,
it
sure.
works. Uh, Look, what is happening here is there are currently 42 countries in the world that owe to China more than 10% of their GDP, which is a huge number. And uh, what is the principal mechanism here is that you lend mindlessly. Now, uh, IMF loans come with strings attached, conditionalities. Some of them they work in favor, some of them they not come in favor. The jury is still out. I mean, there is a whole body of scholarship which says that IMF conditionality is kind of a drug and they would never allow you to come out of it. There is another body of work that says that if you are prudent enough, you can get out of this permanent debt and permanent borrowing mechanism, and you can, be self-sufficient. Both sort of economic stories are out there in the market. Regardless of that, Paris Club has put its limit on how much a country can or cannot borrow. IMF abides by it, World Bank abides by it, and all major donors abide by it. Be it your soft loans, be it your credit lines, so on and so forth. You would also need to know that even though people talk a lot about IMF, IMF has its own definition of concessional loans. Also, IMF, and again, I'm not pro IMF or something like that, but I'm trying to demonstrate lesser of the two evils. So there
Sure.
is a concessionality element. If you are a low income country, then you get at a certain rate, so on and so forth. China abides by no rules. uh, like A, its loans are opaque. B, it is trying actively to find countries to which the Paris Club is no more willing to lend. So when you exhaust all options, then China goes and it is not going to pay money to tide over your IMF loans. It says, I'll build a new palace for you
Right, right.
so that you can show national glory. I will build a port for you where not a single sea would come.
But
So
also, they use their own organizations, their own companies, their own Chinese state corporations to build those. So the loan eventually comes back to China as well. The money from the
yes,
loan eventually comes back to China.
in a way it comes, but see, again, that is fine. I mean, if you are baking your self interest and inserting yourself into interest into others interest, I'm fine for it. This is geopolitics. Nobody is gonna, there are no free lunches, Sagarika.
Sure,
But
sure.
what I'm trying to say is that if you are enjoying 70% of the cake, 30% of the cake should be enjoyed by the host as well.
Right.
There should be some benefit. At least look at the commercial viability of the project. Rather, the principle reverse is here. You look at the commercial unviability of the project so that no money is coming back from that, and therefore you can use this as a leverage as long as you can.
Mm,
Unless
mm,
somebody says that, oh no, I'm going to take over that loan, I'm going to take
mm.
over that debt, and nobody's going to do that. Who third party is going to put mindless money so that they can wean off these countries from Chinese loan? Nobody
Mm.
is going to do it. So this is something that's a part of an active strategy. Second, there are layers and layers within layers and layers. Now, those who are interested, they can go and read aid data. They're the kind of companies that act, and like within a same project, X% of amount comes from corporation A, which is a state-owned company. Y% of the amount comes from corporation B, which is half-owned state company. And it's a huge web of corporations and brands and names, and money is going here and money is going there. Third, the terms and conditions are opaque. So the world don't know how much a country owns, what is the financial health of this country, and should we put in more money or not.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of China, in the case of Pakistan, in our own neighborhood, for very long, China had a single demand that even you want to go to IMF, if you want to buy money, if you want to get loans from IMF, you would never disclose our terms and conditions to the IMF. Eventually, the terms and conditions were disclosed during the Imran Khan government, and the Chinese were quite unhappy about it. But when those things were disclosed, people realized that the Pakistan is paying twice the interest that Pakistan is paying to others. So, you are asking exorbitant interest. B, you are investing in unviable projects. I don't see that you are bringing Chinese labor. I don't know what good you are doing of the host nation. I mean, all these are hallmarks of colonialism.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What I mean, tell me one project which has done so much good of that country, and I mean, that could be a great jewel in the crown of Chinese aid diplomacy. We are yet
Mm.
to find such pieces. So these are some of the hallmarks of the way China operates. Also, if a country like India, again, my research piece is still not out because a
Mm.
lot of review process is going on. But the number I can tell you is that we are so generous that for every dollar that India gives out in terms of foreign aid, 7% is the grant element. This is this is pure grant element, not the 24.5% IMF conditionality grant. So the
Right.
concessional grant element is different. The concessional grant element is different. This is the grant, and above this, the money that we raise from the market, the amortization that we have to pay, that is another grant that we are paying. So 7% is the straight grant beyond amortization and beyond the concessionality element. Now, in the case of China, it is much lower. So, if you really want to be this grand, benign patron of the world, and if you want to reshape the global order, we would expect a lot more benevolence from you. At least try to meet the current hegemon by a dime to a dime and be concessional compared to the IMF loans. Even that is not happening. So, uh, uh, as more and more layers of Chinese debt trap diplomacy unravel, and we see disastrous cases like Sri Lanka, we are realizing that there is a challenge. Now, what can the alternative world do? And I would urge your donors to, I would urge your viewers to
Oh,
go
I
and
do wish I had donuts.
no, sorry, no, no, no. I mean that was a slip of tongue, but hopefully you will get some people to sponsor this program as well soon. The viewership grows enough. My best
Thank
wishes.
you. I
Yeah.
hope so.
So yeah. To your viewers, I would like to refer to the conversation that happened during the Munich Security Conference, where the Bangladeshi foreign minister, he asks a question to the panel of quad foreign ministers and says that, look, you are saying that China creates debt trap diplomacy, so on and so forth. But when we do something well, our population becomes aspirational. They want to grow further, but we don't have money to invest. So we need infrastructure, we need opportunities, and our population has become equally aspirational to the population in the third world. We want to advance into research, we want to do great things, but we need money and investment. And China comes with a very aggressive plan, and how should we deny?
Mm.
Now, so what is trying to say is the point that I made in my vaccine piece is that it's not enough to talk about democracy. You have to
Absolutely.
include a goodie bag of public goods. Your message will only be bought with a goodie bag of public goods. And that's what the Bangladeshi foreign minister was asking for. And we are listening now from the US media that Biden administration is working on an Indo-Pacific economic framework. But they are also talking. There was also talk about Build Back Better. There was also this talk about you know the infrastructure with some basic norms. So landing happens under certain norms. There is certain climate element that is built into it. So if you are making the newer infrastructure, that at least you are making it should be climate sustainable, so on and so forth. So the desirability element is baked into all this thing. So we are mindful about the sustainability. We are mindful about economic viability and most of this aspect. But these are democracies. Things take time. This is not a top-down government system. Also, in the US, I mean, I don't know how much upbeat the Biden administration is, but if most of the polls are to be believed, the House and Senate, both Democrats would be losing, and it will be losing very badly. It's called shellacking. So we are seeing an instance of shellacking happening. Now that happens, again, we don't know how much upbeat the Republicans would be about this strategy.
Right.
So, and we talked about a little bit about Marshall Plan. It was a tough sell to the Republicans back then in the 1950s as well, because they had this America First built into them even in the 1950s, even though they were not using the MAGA slogan back then. So, so these are democracies. They take time. Government swing. Consistency is not a great feature of democratic governments. I mean, there are only very many causes for which you have bipartisan support. And again, India, however up it is, we don't have that sort of deep pockets compared to some other
Absolutely.
quad partners. So it will take some time, but they are in the right direction. They have understood the problem there. And coming back to S. Jaishankar's point, that even though they are talking about it, the leaders, those who are borrowing money, uh, they have to be mindful, because if you are wooed by only the aggressive optics of the plan, and then you are not mindful of the same aspirational population that will have to pay the debt, because it's not that is to be paid by one or two individuals, it is equally shared as a percentage of population share. So if you are really mindful of your aspirational population, you have to be mindful of the consequences as well. So I think we are going through this churn where a counter design to this Chinese debt trap diplomacy is yet to emerge. And because there are so many domestic coalitions, there is a grand coalition of democracies which are all in flux, and it will take time. But I'm sure that without this element of, as I said, public goods provision, without this element of trade and economic framework, mere talk of democracy is not going to seduce the world in this situation of emerging backward.
I think we've struggled with our values based approach where, values are very fickle. They've been so throughout. One day it's democracy, another time it's freedom, another time it's, something else. So a values based system definitely requires a much more of a framework, although an interest based one is very easily understandable, and it's what geopolitics is essentially based on, regardless of the conversations and the sermons around it. So I think we've struggled. I think even India struggled with that sort of an approach recently, especially when it comes to the ongoing conflict and the global geopolitical situation. So it's definitely worth understanding how this gets in the way of public goods provision and actual strategic partnerships, and building up a coalition of better, building a better neighborhood for India. I think this can definitely get in the way if we aren't mindful of an interest-based approach. So that's been interesting. So in terms of our interest, I'm going to let you go after this question, Chirayu. Thank you so much for your time today. But I do have this question about investments and overall benefits that India would have seen due to our vaccine diplomacy. So of course, the vaccine sales have the vaccine production has aided our capability generation and an entire sector coming up, and the markets have gone up due to that as well. But in terms of investment, in terms of other manufacturing, any growth in the sector, what have we seen with regards to international outreach during this period?
Uh, um, Again, I'm not a pharma subject matter expert, so
Sure.
I would start with that caveat and limit myself to what I have read in media. There are few elements. Of course, this helps our own domestic sector here. I mean, needless to highlight that if you excel at something, the world would be willing to invest in you more.
Yes.
We desperately need investment, not only in this sector but possibly every sector if we want to grow. Uh, uh, Moreover, as we become more and more suspicious of Chinese investment, now you have to remember before the LSE fracas broke out, few months before that, we had made a specific provision that any country that has a land border with India, if they have to invest in India, that investment had to go through a special additional clearance.
Yes.
So
Yes.
even before what happened on the border in I think April May 2020,
20.
we were suspicious of Chinese investment, and we were taking it with a pinch of salt. Now, uh, so additional investment in all sectors become more critical as we try to blackball Chinese investment because somebody has to fill in that gap. So that is the first aspect of it. Now, second aspect of it is that the world has seen our pharmaceutical potential, and more so, this becomes critical that if a next pandemic were to be a breakout, and God forbid it doesn't happen, but in case such an eventuality happens, the world needs efficient supply chains for
Right.
all the medicines. And you have to also have to remember that it is not merely about vaccines.
Mm.
Before vaccines, we had supplied HCQs, hydroxychloroquine,
Yes.
I guess, the paracetamols, remdesivirs, and all the additional drugs that required to combat this. And India was the only country who had the capacity to supply it globally. Even President Trump had to acknowledge it.
Yes.
So, from this point onwards, not only for our interest, for global interest as well, countries would be willing to step up because there is a commercial opportunity as well. They are not doing us any favor, we are not doing their any favor. This is a bilaterally beneficial commercial transaction. Again, we have a lot of space, we have a lot of potential, we have a lot of skilled workforce, so everything goes in India's favor. What will also happen is that as India's rise happen, we also have the challenge of combating China in terms of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, the raw material that go into the production of these drugs.
Mm.
So currently, 90% of this APIs are sourced from China, uh, or roughly about so. So I think the government of India is now working in that direction, and there is a whole pharma city coming up in Hyderabad, and we are asking the world to invest in it. So we also have to make sure that for the viability of this sector, the things that we require, the bottlenecks that are there, or the current chokehold is there with the critical APIs that China has. We need to do capacity building in that as well. And India needs to sell to the world that look, we can be your reliable suppliers, being on your side of this divide, but you have to help us in building the necessary raw materials, APIs, capacities that we need to do to scale up this production. And if we are able to sell that idea to global market, both in term, both geopolitically to the governments, so that they facilitate the bilateral investment, and also to the people in the private sector that look, this is a great way to make money. You can mass export here.
Mm.
We are also scaling up our export facilities in terms of ports, in terms of our airports. We are also increasing our mobility. We are also talking about this multimodal facility where waterways and highways can be used, so on and so forth.
Right.
There's a great infrastructure boom going on in India, where even if you have a production facility somewhere remote in India, because of the new infrastructure, you can easily mobilize those goods to one of the ports from which you can export globally. So there's a lot of churn happening, and yeah, with this new capital coming in, you can also focus on research. You can also become a great research hub. Currently, what is happening is you are in the tier two of it, where you are doing the manufacturing, but the research is happening somewhere else. So you have an
Mm.
Oxford AstraZeneca
Yeah.
module that was created in Oxford University, and what you did is you are just replicating millions of that modules, the molecules. So to prevent that happening merely, and you become the research hub here, I think that is also an important thing. So research, selling this idea, and securing investment, expanding on the production capabilities, and also focusing on raw materials and APIs, on currently which China is having the chokehold. So all these are the things. Of course, what India has done the stellar job. Everything would be facilitated and fast tracked. Government is also putting in favorable policies, but that would not be enough. You always need to work harder.
Of course. So, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Chirayu. It's been wonderful, and I think it's a great idea to discuss the Chinese debt trap diplomacy, like you mentioned earlier. I will definitely try to set it up. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. You've provided a lot of insight into it already, and I hope our viewers can take from that. Again, I'm going to link the article that Chirayu also wrote. It's a very interesting piece. It goes into the comparison of the strategic benevolence with in regards to the vaccine diplomacy, as well as the Marshall Plan that was previously mentioned by him as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Chirayu. I look forward to talking to you very soon, and see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.